I wanted to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Alt21, the foreign exchange and hedging platform that saves you time and money on cross-border transactions. A previous guest, Dan Gardner, spoke about forecasting and risk. One of his central points was, as he put it, the things we're doing now are so incredibly complex, to see even a little bit into the future takes an enormous amount of struggle, and even then we're going to make mistakes. As CEO of Newroll, predicting just 12 months out is hard. As we expand, variables and risks multiply. Anything I can do to take risk off the table is helpful. In the past, I've been blind to the risk of FX exposure in our budgeting. A small movement could eat into our investment budget and compromise our credibility when our forecasts are wrong. If you want to remove risk from your foreign exchanges without breaking the bank, head to alt21.com. That's alt21.com to find out more. Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Newroll. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Newroll, the board search specialist and market leader bringing science to the art of board hiring. Today's guest, the Right Honourable Nadhim Zahawi, is a former Chancellor of the Exchequer and Conservative Party chair. As MP for Stratford-upon-Avon, he held a number of senior ministerial positions between 2018 and 2023 under UK Prime Ministers Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Beyond his parliamentary career, in 2000, Nadhim co-founded YouGov, where he served as CEO. He took the company public in 2005 before stepping down in 2010 at a market cap of £43 million. He was formerly non-executive director at S3 plc and is currently chair of the Very Group. Nadhim is the author of The Boy from Baghdad, From Waziriya to Westminster. Nadhim, a huge welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
In The Boy from Baghdad, there are elements of your story escaping from Iraq and building business that have some uncanny similarities to the story we heard in episode 101 when Dr. Ali Parsa talked about his escape from Iran in the 80s and going on to build Babylon. In particular, the sliding doors moments that changed his life and helped the foundations for a successful entrepreneurial journey. Really interested to hear what have been your sliding doors moments on your journey into the boardroom and how have they informed the way you have succeeded?
Well, the first sliding doors was actually beyond the boardroom. It was existential because if we hadn't escaped Iraq, I think my father would have ended up being in one of those mass graves that was so sadly and in many ways graphically discovered by the Allies and, of course, the Kurdish forces themselves. People were taken away, they disappeared, and they were murdered and buried in mass graves all over the country, including in the south of Iraq. And so I will be eternally grateful to my father for bringing us to these shores and choosing to put down roots in Britain. And so that was really the first moment. And it was brought home to me really powerfully when I returned to Iraq in 2003-04, when I met my first cousin, who's a similar age, a few years older than I am. And he was less fortunate than I am in the sense that his parents, my auntie, chose to stay in Iraq. And of course, he was sent to the front line in the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s. He was a young man, had his whole future ahead of him. He had just got married and I think had one child and one on the way and ended up disappearing for 12 years. We couldn't find him. Couldn't find him on any list, not the Red Cross list, not the Red Crescent, as a prisoner of war, until one day he showed up in Baghdad after being released from some horrific prison camp in Iran to see that he had two children that were now teenagers. Pretty horrific experience. And his whole life has been forever blighted by Saddam and his experience of war and hardship. And his cousin lands on these shores, 1978, 79, and ends up living in number 11 Downing Street. It couldn't be more different in many ways. It could have so easily have been me on that front line of the war between Iraq and Iran. So that was probably the first sliding door. And then, of course, when I was bitten by the political bug and was discovered as a young activist, councillor in London by Geoffrey Archer, asked to be part of his mayoral team, to be mayor of London, in 99, I think it was the campaign, 2000. And of course, meeting Stephen Shakespeare. Stephen was the only salaried member of the team. He was chief of staff to the Archer for Mayor campaign for London. And of course, then Jeffrey's campaign so publicly blowing up, with him having to admit that he was taped, I think, by the News of the World, speaking to an old acquaintance friend of his about the trial that had happened 13 years before of Monica Coghlan. And of course, then the campaign collapsing, Stephen being out of work. And one of the ideas we had for the mayoral candidate who would, implement it if he was mayor, was londongov.com, which is the idea was this is the beginning of the internet. It was the year 2000, and we would connect Londoners through this thing called the internet, and we would ask them questions about how they want their money spent by the new mayor, Mayor Archer, and then we would be able to replay back to them how we're spending their money. They get to vote on it. Anyway, that never happened because our candidate blew up, and we decided actually there's something in the idea of no taxation without representation, Boston Tea Party stuff, that the world was going to shift in favor of we the people because of the internet, because of this thing that's going to network all of us. The equilibrium, the relationship between we the people and the executive, whether it be government or great corporates, was going to shift in our favor because of the internet. And if we can harness that shift, that network, then surely to God we can produce better quality outcomes for the people, but also inform the executive as to what people wanted and how they behaved. And hence YouGov was born. I came up with the name, and we began the business in my spare bedroom in my flat in Putney. And the name is actually an amalgam of two words, you and govern. A proper sort of consumer democracy, i.e. we the people are going to be able to have a lot more say about what happens in our community vis-a-vis government, and also vis-a-vis M&S and brands like Coca-Cola and others, because we'll be able to make sense of the data that people will share with us by building these large panels online versus what was then being done, which was clipboard. And the innovation in those days was telephone polling. And that was the second, I guess, sliding door. And probably the third and probably most important, well, actually couple. One was after launching the business, within 2 weeks, the dot-com bubble burst. So there was no money around. So we had to bootstrap the business. And that was, in many ways, when I look back, a great thing, because we were able to be masters of our own destiny as a business. But more important than all of that is, as we began to run out of money, we discovered what became a fantastic tool for us, which is academia. We thought if we can convince the world that it's better quality data if you build these large panels online, connect them, network them, and then question them. And of course, the computers will be able to hold all that data, much more forensic data than you would have through a telephone poll. Then surely we can create a much better model, because we're all in the business of modeling rather than scientific measurement, and therefore a better mousetrap as a business. And we got our first break with the British election study, which is the biggest academic study that's conducted in the United Kingdom. There's the American election study, there's the Australian. It goes around democracies around the world at every general election. So for the 2001 general election, they asked us to participate and give them our raw data. That was the condition of participation. And they already had data from the telephone and the face-to-face pollsters. And of course, they published an academic piece of work after the election as to how accurate were the pollsters, how well did they perform. The one thing they omitted to tell us, because we jumped at the chance, because we needed that sort of academic credibility, that they had no money left, because they'd actually already apportioned the money to the other traditional research agencies. Anyway, we had no choice. We thought the only way we're going to break through, is to demonstrate to the world that this data is better quality, right? If not equal quality. It's definitely something worth looking at. And so we conducted the work. We, I think, delivered the most accurate prediction for the outcome of the 2001 general election. And the academics started talking about us, and we came to be noticed by Professor Anthony King, who was also the great psephologist for the Telegraph. And he convinced the powers that be of the Telegraph to take us seriously. And they gave us part of their contract. And I asked them for one additional condition, which is we will do the research for them and we'll give them the best price possible. I wanted our logo to be carried with every poll in the paper. And that was great for us because it became known as the Telegraph YouGov poll. And it's what got us really sort of noticed. And so those, I would say, are probably the 4 sliding doors that transformed my life in many ways. Because once academia and then the media started publishing us, then it's a no-brainer. It's faster, it's deeper, and it's cheaper. And that's what's made, clearly online research today, 25 years later, probably the dominant form of market research around the world.
Really interesting. It echoes there of both Ali Pastor's story of just the importance of getting out of Iraq, but then also actually Edwina Dunn of Dunhumby and her story of meeting the right partner at the right time, but then also both business partner, but also commercial partner who provided that distribution for you and your ability to capitalize on that and see the bigger picture beyond the purely short-term economic aspect of it. I'd love to dive more in a second into your YouGov experience and how the board helped you on that journey. But before we do, I'd be curious to hear more about the vaccine task force and what you learnt about short-circuiting bureaucracy there, because I imagine you faced a lot of it. In episode 59, we had Anand Aital, who's the Cabinet Office lead non-exec, where he made a powerful case for why board members should engage in government board roles. I've often thought of it in my own head, like, why would anyone do that? It's a thankless task and you just get caught up in bureaucracy. But he made a really powerful case for it.
One, I think we did really well to listen to Patrick Ballance to set up the Vaccines Task Force in the first place. And I was just lucky because it happened to be set up in my department. I was the junior minister of the Department of Trade. It's called the Department of Energy and Industrial Strategy. And it was led by Kate Bingham, who did brilliantly for us in very quickly sifting through the 120 plus teams who were telling us they can produce a vaccine, shortlisting, I think 7 or 8, and then contracting very quickly with the successful teams, even before we'd known that they would be successful. She is clearly very good at her job. So the procurement side was under the VTF, the Vaccine Task Force. And then what I was asked to set up was the deployment side and lead on that side. Once you've got a vaccine on its way, one, how are you going to store it, distribute it, and get it into people's arms? Because there's no good sitting in the warehouse for you. And I think, again, there, I had a great team. And I worked out very quickly from the moment I was appointed that what I needed to do was kick the tires. And on the whole, the team had pretty much planned and were in a good place vis-a-vis what we needed to do to get the infrastructure built to be able to jab 1 million people a day. Before taking the role, I remember very clearly my mobile phone going off and it's the Prime Minister on the phone, Boris Johnson. And he says, sort of, only Boris can do this. Your country needs you, Nadhim. I said, what's that, boss? He says, you are going to be the man that's going to vaccinate the nation. And I paused and said, it's a great honor. He said, no, I need you. It's not a question. We've had such a challenging time with test and trace. We need this to be a huge success and only you can do this. So I said, yes, immediately. You remember this was a time when the nation was locked down. We were in massive pain. People were dying in their thousands. We didn't know whether we were going to be able to really protect people with a vaccine yet. We hadn't got there yet. But I wasn't going to turn down the rope. But what I did say, I said, I'll do it on one condition, Prime Minister. I said, I have to be able to speak with your authority. And he paused. He said, what do you mean? What does that mean? And I said, I have to be able to access you in minutes, right? Maximum an hour, because I'm going to be making decisions so fast, right? I can't wait through the usual machinery of government to work for me to get an audience with you in a week or 2 weeks' time. It's just not going to work. If I'm going to make a decision, I need you to back me up on it. And I've got to be able to get your authority. You've got it. Came back the response immediately. You've got it. done. And then 2 days later, I was announced as the minister for vaccine deployment. So I, as you would do, as any good businessman, entrepreneur would do, I was like, right, let me go and visit the team. Let me see the plans. Let me go through them. Let me understand how far they've got, where they need support. What more do we need to do if there is going to be a vaccine that's going to come through? And I very quickly worked out that Emily Lawson and the team had done a phenomenal job. Military under Brigadier Phil Prosser, now General Phil Prosser, was embedded in the NHS headquarters. A great move to bring the guys in who were responsible for delivering supplies to far-flung places like Kandahar and elsewhere around the world. Being late was not an option for those guys. People lost their lives. You can't be late saying, I haven't delivered your ammo or your food or your supplies to the front line. And so I felt very much that really my role was to just build confidence in the plans that we've got in place for implementation, the operational plans, and to protect my team, because everyone was an armchair analyst of how to best build a vaccine infrastructure. Those who've had access to the PM would be bombarding him with ideas. And of course, he'd filter them down to me. And I'd have to be able to just work out very quickly, actually, what were really good things that we should look at. Like, should we be bringing more pharmacy vaccines, onto the system or not, vaccinating through pharmacies or otherwise? A complete waste of time call. All of that only worked if you trust your team. And that was, in many ways pivotal, because once I'd been through the plans and understood them and questioned and probed and really understood where we were at, I wouldn't have been able to do that. And then things like make sure we use data properly. We had a brilliant platform built for us by Palantir, delivering phenomenal data once we began vaccinating. I felt that we should just flick the switch, share it with the nation. We can't lock people down and tell them, look, you're going to have to trust me. The vaccination is going well. I didn't think I'd be able to hold the line going on television every night saying, we've done adequate numbers today, ladies and gentlemen. Don't worry about it. I'll tell you in a couple of weeks' time how many we've done. It wasn't going to hold. And one of the best things we did was starting to share data with the nation. You remember we used to publish daily data. We've had to adjust it every sort of 2-3 days if we had undershot or overshot with the numbers. But it just began to build the confidence of the country that actually these guys know what they're doing, all right? We're going to build. We knew that we're going to begin with modest numbers in the thousands as we build and build and build and got to that, just shy of 1 million a day.
You've talked there about the importance of getting the authority from effectively the CEO, the PM. You've talked there about the importance of sharing transparency and data to show the progress you were making. In episode 100, we had Professor Amy Edmondson talk about the importance of psychological safety, which has always been something very important to me as a CEO, to foster that people know it's okay to make mistakes. And she differentiated between intelligent mistakes versus preventable or complex mistakes. And one of the things that would terrify me about a government role is that people always have the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, and they go and beat you over the head if you make a mistake, forgetting what it was like in the moment. Any advice for those who might be stepping into that sort of role?
Yeah, a couple of things to say on that. One, you have to be comfortable holding risk, right? We do it all the time in the capitalist system, in the commercial world, right? And I think in many ways, we have got to ourselves into an unhealthy place in the public sector where civil servants feel they have to sort of de-risk every decision for their Secretary of State because of that, gotcha moment, or the moment where people basically are just pointing fingers as to your shock horror, you've made a mistake, right? I think we've got to get much better in the civil service being comfortable holding risk. I used to ban people saying to me, but Secretary of State, we are de-risking this for you. What does that really mean? It's meaningless, right? Because if you de-risk everything, you don't make a decision. And actually not making decisions has consequences that could be as dire as making a decision fast, even if it's wrong, but then, correcting fast and moving forward.
To risk nothing is to risk everything.
Right? So I think in many ways, we've got a lot to learn from the commercial sector as to how you get comfortable holding risk. Let me give you a couple of examples of where I think we did it well and examples where we didn't do so well. So I think where we did it well is you look at the ventilator challenge, right? We had to produce 30,000 ventilators in something like 12 weeks, right? Otherwise, we thought the NHS will collapse because that was some of the stuff that was coming through. Do you remember in Italy where they were struggling to keep people incubated? The Prime Minister and a number of senior ministers got on the call with 65 of the greatest industrialists in the land, industrial companies, and said, we need your help. I was the junior minister on the call, sort of doing the job for my department, for the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department, which would end up having to implement whatever decision is made. So I was listening in on the call, and he said, your country needs you. We've got to make these 30,000 ventilators. Otherwise, the NHS is going to collapse. I need to go for it. And James Dyson, to his credit, put his hand up, put 20 million of his money plus, and tried to design a ventilator from scratch. Didn't quite work out. But what did work out is I had a brilliant man called Dick Elsey. We gave him a knighthood, so Dick Elsey now, who was head of the high-value manufacturing catapult for the government. And the next day after that call, he came to my office and said, Minister, I've got to have a quick word with you. It's urgent. Of course, Dick, come in. He said, that call yesterday, we're never going to make a ventilator in 12 weeks if we're going to design it from scratch, because it takes at least 6 months to get through the regulatory approvals. Not because they're bad, it's just because, they're important. You don't want to produce a machine that then kills people. I said, I agree with you, Dick, but you look like you've got a solution for me. He said, I do. I think what we should do is there are 2 ventilator designs. One's already available from Smith Industries and another one from a smaller company in Oxfordshire that are already approved, right? So we can short circuit the regulatory process. What we need to do is probably bring them together with some manufacturing scale. So if we team them up with Airbus and Ford, use their manufacturing capability, we can do it. I looked at it, studied it, looked at the detail in a day, and I said, go ahead. We couldn't go through government procurement, have a competitive tender, because we had no time. But I knew I had an expert in Dick Elsey who knew what he's talking about, and I can defend it at the dispatch box. I can defend it on Newsnight, say, this is why I did it. This is why it made sense. And we literally had to just sit down with those 4 companies and work out how we're going to pair them up and who's going to do what. And we did it. We made the ventilators. We ended up actually donating a lot of them to India at the time because we didn't really need to use them in the UK. But nevertheless, that was a perfect example of holding risk. I know I can defend that in front of the National Audit Office or anyone else. Say, yes, I took that decision. I chose these companies because I had no other way of doing it. Plus, I had an expert who was advising me. Now, PPE, right? I wish what we had done on PPE was to bring in an expert like Dick Elsey, bring in my friend Justin King, ex-CEO of Sainsbury's, very comfortable, ordering thousands of different items, SKUs as they call them in retail, right? Knowing that each and every one of them will come in on time, on budget, right? And be delivered to 500-600 different retail outlets. We should have done the same in PPE. Bring in, where is your Kate Bingham or your Dick Elsey? And be comfortable holding risk. Instead, ministers were well-meaning, but got themselves tangled up in all sorts of trouble, right? Because people are obviously wanting to help in some way, and you had some shysters as well. And so I think you've got to get comfortable holding risk. And I think we can learn a lot from the input of good commercial non-execs in terms of how we hold risk in government and be able to deliver, because there's no such thing as de-risking a decision in anything that we do. And I think that is both a challenge, but an opportunity. In many ways, I am willing on Vivek and Elon to succeed in the Department of Government Efficiency, because if they can, even if they can't save 2 trillion, if they get even close to $500 billion, right, that will transform how you do delivery in the civil service in democratic countries around the world, in all countries around the world. But we have to get comfortable holding risk.
It's interesting, and I guess fostering more intelligent failures rather than those preventable or complex failures that Amy Edmondson talks about. One of the innovations that you talked about, again in The Boy from Baghdad, was bringing in all the previous education secretaries when you were education secretary as effectively a board, and to bring that cognitive diversity. And I just thought that's a brilliant idea. Why is that not a systemic thing? And why does every CEO not bring in their predecessors to do the same? Because there's so much institutional knowledge that gets lost. We just had actually, we have this community where board members can come and ask anonymous questions. And we just had a CEO come on and ask, they're new into a CEO role, asking what should they do? And it just strikes me as mad that there's not a playbook out there ready for them to sort of take on that their organization has set up for them. How did that work? Curious to understand. That I could imagine that could have been a complete nightmare, or it could have been, if done well, actually really quite instructive.
There's more than one area where I think you would benefit in service delivery, both in the private and the public sector, of institutional memory, right? And knowledge. What I did there was actually, it was a conversation I was having with Paul Marshall of Marshall Wace, who is passionate about education, obviously backs an academy trust as well. And I said, wouldn't it be wonderful if I can bring all the previous secretaries of state, because that institutional memory is invaluable for me. And being from a YouGov background, we could have a wonderful, high-powered focus group that would help me in my journey as Secretary of State. And I was just beginning my journey. And Paul very sweetly said, look, I'll host it. If you can pull them together, we'll host a dinner for you. And it was fantastic because I was able to bring Ken Baker to sit with, whether it was Ed Balls or Michael Gove, right? Around the table with Justine Greening and with Charles Clark and with, what's his name? His name's gone out of my head now. David Blunkett. I remember it. Thank God. You don't have to do another take now. But it was remarkable. There was more common ground between Baker and Ed Balls than there was between Gove and Baker, which I thought was fascinating in itself. So it was brilliant. And it helped me tremendously just listening to them and probing them and asking questions as the new boy on the block. I did one other thing when I was a junior minister in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And it was with Jerry Grimstone, who was the Minister for Business Investment, I think it was called. And I brought all the regulators together, right? And I called it Regulators for Growth. What a novel idea, right? And I brought...
Sounds like an oxymoron.
Right? I brought the brilliant regulator from health, June Rain, to do a show and tell as to how she dealt with this challenge of having this European regulator, which is the sort of 800-pound gorilla, and being more agile in the UK with the pharma industry. And the output from that was a couple of surprising things. One, they said no ministers ever invited us in to be together, to listen to, or to come up with ideas for growth. Two, we've never had a minister in government actually describe to us what their strategy is, because we know we're independent of government as the regulators, but it's great just to hear, like, okay, well, what is your strategy for business and business growth? And I said to Boris at the time, but sadly he didn't have the time. Of course, circumstances and events took over. I said to him, we should actually institutionalize this and make it something that you chair, Prime Minister, that we bring all the regulators together and each one of them has to come up with an idea for growth. And what did I see the other day? But Keir Starmer saying that actually what I'm going to do is bring the regulators. And this was, I did this it was just pre-COVID, when we were preparing for Brexit. So a good 5-6 years ago. It's those sort of things that I think are incredibly important. If you bring people together, the multiplier effect of what you could achieve is incredible. And especially if you apply the Reagan principle, i.e. don't be proud. The one thing I always said in every department I entered, my mantra was very simple. Right? Don't hug the world, right? Which means don't try and do too many things. Take me through what the strategy is in the department. Every department I've walked into, I get my senior civil servants, my director generals, the perm sec, and we whiteboard everything the department is doing. I know the outcome because in each and every case, we're doing too many things, right? Because every time there's a reshuffle, there's new ministers and they have to come up with new initiatives and new ideas. We're very good at piloting lots of stuff. Very bad at scaling anything, right? Scale is hard, by the way. Scale in the public sector and the private sector is why there's so few trillion-dollar businesses, because scale is hard. Anyway, By the end of the process, after the whiteboard process, we're down to 3 things. Give you an example from education. I said, we're going to do skills, schools, and family, right? That's what we're going to focus on. So next meeting, if we're going to do those 3 things, what are we dropping? We can't keep all the other initiatives. We've got to drop a load of stuff, right? Stop doing a load of stuff. Pause it, whatever you want to do with it. And then you refine all of that. And so that the whole organization begins to understand what you're trying to achieve, where you're going to try and get to. But all of that requires you not to have pride, in the sense that not everything has to be invented by you. And back to my Reagan principle, if I saw something that worked, T-levels, I wanted to just keep doubling down and scaling them. And a Labour minister had come up with them. It was his baby. But I could see they were transformational for the skills landscape in our country. You could do a T-level, which is equivalent of 3 A-levels, and go straight to work at Microsoft or at BAE Systems, or you can go to university. You choose.
You just give me a penny drop moment there, because one of the things that we wrestle with in our sort of vision for building better boards is most boards are dysfunctional. And why is that? Why are they not adding more value when there's clear evidence to show that they could add more value? And one of the things we've been piloting, which we think has huge potential, is this concept of pop-up boards, which allows people to put together a board for a specific issue for a limited amount of time. And I think it works for a number of reasons. But one of the things that you're talking there about the Reagan principle that just dropped for me is that board is assembled only for the benefit of that particular issue. So no one has got any face at risk. Whereas a traditional board, ultimately, one of their responsibilities is to hire and fire the CEO. And therefore, that is always an underlying latent threat. Whereas with these pop-up boards, you have none of that underlying threat. And I think it's one of the reasons they work so well.
It's one of the things I wanted to do in government. And I hope one day I'll get the opportunity to do it. And it almost needs cross-party agreement on this. And I think I can get it. And what I wanted to do and learn the lessons of the vaccine task force, of the Dick Elseys of this world I talked to you about earlier on the ventilator challenge. And that is, any Secretary of State should be able to bring in external help, not just advice, decision-making help, right? With a vetting process that should take no more than 3 to 6 weeks, right? You don't need to vet anyone for more than that. And that individual, whether tasked with one particular project or a bigger remit, should have decision-making power equal to the Director General in the civil service, right? Because then they really can make things happen in the machine. It took me to get Peter Bazalgette to be a non-exec at the Department of Education with a supportive perm sec, by the way. Susan Ackland-Hood, brilliant perm sec education, wanted Peter to come in. We thought he had a lot to offer us. It took me 12 months. I was exiting the building to go and become Chancellor of the Exchequer as he was entering to be a non-exec director in the Department of Education. It's mad, right? I don't know who would wait that long other than Peter, who was so very sweet and said, look, fine, when you guys get through the process, I'm happy to come and help and contribute. We should be able to, and there's the reason I say I want cross-party support, because you've got to get all party agreement that whoever's in government can bring in, if I am Secretary of State for Education, I want you to come and join me for 6 months, but I want you to have decision-making power because I know you've got a particular expertise I need on skills or on schools or on family or whatever it happens to be. I should be able to bring you in with a 4-week vetting process. You're in from outside of government and you're going to make that project happen with the decision-making power. I think it would transform government delivery, genuinely.
We see it on the platform because we have a number of government roles on there and they are always the slowest to complete. And it's never quite been clear to me, obviously, other than all this vetting, why does it need to take so much longer than the commercial roles or the charitable roles? Like, what is so unique about it? There must be a better way of doing this.
Because it's when process trumps outcome. The only 2 times I've had the privilege to have the experience of outcome trumping process is the vaccine task force and the vaccine deployment and Her Majesty's funeral, where we knew we only had 11 days to deliver. And then it was, the day.
Tell me more about the public appointments process from your perspective as a minister. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but we're often asked by those from a commercial world, should I even bother applying for this role? Isn't it just going to be the minister's choice of person? And we've had past permanent secretaries talking in the community saying, no, these processes are well run, they're fair, they're transparent. But really curious to hear about it through your perspective as a minister. What advice would you be giving to a sort of senior executive, experienced board member thinking about applying for board roles? Are they wasting their time?
The processes are okay. I wouldn't say they are anywhere near being good enough, not least because of what you and I have just discussed. Inordinate length of time it takes, I think, is unhealthy, and anyone with any talent wouldn't wait that long, right? They would just move on and do something else with their life. I don't think they're completely open and straightforward. You get sort of ministers deciding who they like and so on and they want. Now, don't get me wrong. I do think ministers should have an input. In fact, what I've just said to you, my initiative was to say ministers should be able to say to their firm, say, I want so-and-so, and here's why. As long as the process was transparent and they can defend it at a dispatch box in the court of public opinion, then I absolutely would support it, right? But a transparent process, you could have proper scrutiny through the select committee process in Parliament. The person has to go before the select committee, ask a question before they're appointed, but do it in 4 weeks, not a year. Where I think it's absolutely worthwhile is if you think you've got something to give and you want that experience, and by the way, it is, I think, incredibly fulfilling, then what you should do, if nothing else, it's not just a question of applying, it's taking time out to talk to senior civil servants, to ministers, say, look, this is my experience, this is what I can do. By the way, I just want to highlight it to you. I just want to flag it just in case one day you might think it's something that is valuable for service delivery, right? I just think it really is worthwhile having your name on the radar, right? And the way to do that is to make sure, just remember, nobody knows what you do because everyone's busy, right? It's not because they don't want to know. It's because they just don't have the bandwidth. And therefore, if you are interested, just put your hand up and say, I'm interested.
It's interesting. That was one of the things you wrote about in The Boy About Baghdad, that your political career was perhaps slower than you might have liked because you didn't do enough of that. I'm keen to move on to talk about YouGov because it's such a great story. In episode 95, Moonpig founder Nick Jenkins talked about some of the key inflection points when board members changed the course of his company's trajectory. One of them that stood out for me was when one of his board members asked why they weren't selling the cards for $2.99 rather than $1.99, which Nick had got obsessed on. They needed to be $1.99. And it was a really simple question, but it was delivered at the right time from the right person with the right credibility as a NED, that it just transformed their unit economics. Were there any similar moments for you at YouGov with your board?
Yeah, I think actually in many ways, the moment I think was when Roger Parry joined us and just made us lift our sights and be a little bit more confident at holding risk and taking risk to go to America. So lots of advice was, don't go to America. It's a graveyard for British business entrepreneurs who think they can do well in America. M&S and Brooks Brothers, Tesco, Philip Green, all had a nightmare. My hunch was that there are some sectors of the economy, the American market is so competitive or just closed to us. In the creative industries, in California and New York, in the media world, and in information, they had allowed Europeans, and especially Brits, to come in. Now, I don't know whether it's the accent or whatever it is that they think we're sort of vaguely intelligent, that they should listen to us. I thought, actually, it's worth going to America. And Roger was fantastic as a non-exec chairman to not simply say, no, don't go to America, it's too dangerous, stick to the UK, or maybe take a little step into Europe. I did take a step into Europe, it was a disaster in Germany. And I've been scarred by the German acquisition that we made that Stefan had to eventually sort out. I tried very hard, very difficult. When we did the deal, they were all excited about the YouGov model and how they're going to conquer Germany with the YouGov model. Of course, once they took the check and banked it, the Works Council and the traditional way of doing research was not something that was so easy to overcome. And so it was horrific.
I guess one of the other big decisions you had was taking the company public, which you did in 2005 as CEO. Really interested to hear how you reflect back on that decision. And it's interesting now, YouGov has obviously taken a hit in the public markets recently.
We got to that point where we needed to grow and expand what was then clearly a successful business model. We'd built that better mousetrap. And by that point, the banks are throwing money at you saying, come and borrow lots of money. What a great business you have, right? And by the way, they weren't there when it was raining and pouring and we had no money. And we were trying to beg them to say, this is such a great, look at the data, it's amazing. We had private equity come and say, take money. And I started with private equity because a billionaire friend of Stefan's recommended this guy who shall remain nameless from Goldman, but he was a complete nightmare. I was going to say something slightly more colorful about him. Arrogant, tells you how wonderful you are for the first few meetings until he begins to tell you how risky your business is, how it's overconcentrated, how it's worth tuppence, but they still want to buy into it.
Oh gosh, probably one of my former colleagues.
Right. Anyway, I wasted my time for about 3 months with this guy, which slightly pissed me off. And then my UK CEO, the school gate, said, there's a guy there who is Noble & Co., one of the oldest brokers in the city, who's a big fan of YouGov, reads the Telegraph, blah, blah, blah. Would love to meet you, Nadhim, because they think that there's this thing called AIM, which is a really interesting market. And I said, well, Panos, why don't you ask him to come to the office? He came in, started telling me all about the public markets and why actually it's a fairer way of valuing your business. And I thought, you know what? Let me find out a little bit more. And as we did, I thought, actually, this is a better route for us to go down than with these private equity guys. And actually, it really was. It was a fantastic vehicle. It gave me the paper that I needed to go to America. Couldn't have done America without cash and paper for Doug Rivers. And to his credit, Doug is, I think, still with the business today, which is remarkable. Most founders tend to sort of move on after 3 years and they're out. Which just shows you what a genius deal that was to go to America, and that particular deal itself with Doug. But then, of course, we had our knocks as well. I had to abandon the acquisition, probably the best £2.5 million we ever lost in advisory fees because we didn't buy Harris Poll in America. And I had to announce to the city why, which I got knocked hard for, and that was painful. But then the company had a phenomenal journey on the markets, getting to 1.3 billion market cap. It has been knocked back now. I think, it's not for me to comment. It'd be unfair for me to comment on the leadership team at the moment. I certainly wouldn't do that because I don't know them. I don't know the CEO. I heard some good things about him, but I don't know him. I keep in touch with Stefan, who's chairman. All I can tell you is it's a high quality business. Profit warnings can be brutal. And I think that's what they've suffered from today, but they will come back. It's a great, great business. But if you ask me, I would absolutely recommend it to any entrepreneur to at least give their chance to look at the public markets. I worry that the UK, when I was Chancellor, was moving in the wrong direction as far as being attractive enough for what I would call the new world economy, especially on tech. NASDAQ is winning every single day, and I worry about that. And there are things that we can do as a government that I hope this government will look into implementing, including for a very long time. And I blame Gordon Brown for this. Pension funds, moved completely away from equity markets. Again, back to this whole spurious idea of de-risking everything. You can't do that, right? You can't just keep buying government gilts and living off that. And it's just, anyway, I've got a lot to say about some of this stuff, but maybe it's for another interview.
Time has flown by, which means it's time for the lightning round where I'm going to say a short statement and ask you for a quick response if you're ready.
Yeah.
Best book every board member should read and why?
Good to great. Why? It made me focus intently on delivery. Don't try and make it perfect. Much better than it done. Get it implemented and build the plane while you're flying it.
Boardroom behavior that irritates you most?
Intellectual arrogance.
Most valuable board ritual?
Away days.
Favorite quote?
Everyone has a strategy till I punch them in the face.
Most significant professional insight?
Don't hug the world. Focus on few things, deliver them well. Scale is hard.
Worst professional advice you've ever received?
Hire a consultant.
What have you changed your mind about regarding boards over time?
Bring people in, take you out of your comfort zone.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom, and what did you learn?
Germany, And it was incredibly wrong just to take the seller's word for what they're going to do.
How are you better today as a board member than when you started?
I think I have gained invaluable experience delivering things like the vaccine rollout, running the Treasury, running the Cabinet Office, making judgment calls every day that in many ways are transformational for the nation. That I hope I can bring that input into any board.
And finally, 3 takeaways our listeners should take from this podcast if they remember nothing else.
Failure is great. Always invest in people who failed and are trying again. Leaders that can stay disciplined and focused are invaluable. And leaders who know when to pivot are equally valuable.
That has been an incredible combination of entrepreneurial and government insights. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience. And a special thank you to Roger Parry, your former chair, for making this happen.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Building a non-exec career is hard. For those starting out, boards can be opaque. For more experienced board members, it can be lonely and hard to stay match fit. Having placed almost 4,000 people on boards in the last 5 years, we know what success looks like. It requires time, energy, resilience, information, and connections. New Role Plus, our community of board peers, exists to give you these things, offering you wholesale support as you try to get board roles and become a standout Ned. Find out more at newrole.com/newrole-plus. That's newrole.com/newrole-plus.